Hello and welcome to Decision NYC with Ben Max. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. Today, I'm pleased to bring you a one-on-one interview with one of the candidates for mayor, Bill Pepitone, the Conservative Party nominee. Bill, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So please introduce yourself to voters a little bit, your background, your resume, what brings you to this race seeking to be the next mayor of New York City.
My name is Bill Pepitone. I am the Conservative Party candidate for mayor of New York City. I am a retired New York City police officer, tactics instructor, and training coordinator with over 30 years experience in law enforcement, public safety, and operational management. I decided to run for mayor last June of 2020, when our city was being destroyed, attacked, looted, burned, our police officers were being attacked, our citizens were being attacked, and our elected officials did absolutely nothing. With my experience, my knowledge of the city, my love of the city, I decided to do more than just complain. I decided to step up and run for office, run for mayor of New York City, to help make New York City safe again, to help make New York City free again, and to give the city back to the people of New York.
Thank you. So since this motivated your run for mayor, speak a little bit more about how you would have handled both the protests that were occurring in 2020 around the sort of resurgent Black Lives Matter movement, as well as some of the much more brief period of looting that we saw over the course of a few nights in Manhattan mostly. How would you have handled both of those and run the police department in a way that would have created more public safety and also avoided so many of the scenes that we saw of clashes between police officers and peaceful protesters?
Well, I had the experience of working under two mayors when there was a lot of civil disobedience, civil unrest. Mayor Dinkins, we had the Crown Heights riots. I was on the first lines of defense in 1991 during the Crown Heights riots, and I saw how appeasement and lack of visibility and just allowing criminals and anarchists to do whatever they want destroyed a neighborhood and divided people. It injured a lot of people. It injured a lot of police officers, myself included. I then saw how Mayor Giuliani reacted to it with a zero tolerance policy for any type of violent behavior. We all have the right to protest peacefully. This is America. This is New York City. You have the right to protest peacefully at any time. But once there is one act of violence, one act of disobedience, those protests need to be shut down. If they would have acted aggressively in doing that in the summer of 2020, we would have had far less property damage. We would have had far less people injured, civilians injured. We would have had far less police officers injured, and we would have quelled that demonstration and those disturbances immediately. They would not have lingered on for an entire summer. They would not have shut down a city at times and destroyed businesses and property. We would have ended it, and it would have avoided a lot more violence down the road. We need a zero tolerance policy regarding violent behavior in this city.
How, as a police department, do you shut down a mass protest like that? There seemed to be some tactics from the NYPD where they tried some things like at times kettling. How do you do that while respecting people's rights to protest and execute what you were saying?
Well, again, people have the right to protest peacefully, of course, but anyone who gets out of line or becomes violent or injures anyone needs to be arrested. And there are ways to do that. There are a lot of tactics to do that. We used to practice formations. They used to call it the wedge, line and wedge formations. We used to practice them constantly. I worked in a disorder control unit for 14 years, and I taught disorder control for 5 years in the police academy. There are formations you can use that can isolate the person you're trying to arrest while keeping everyone else safe. There are other resources you can use for visibility purposes, just to show the crowd that we are not going to stand for violence. And the mayor did not use those. He did not use the mounted police, which are such a deterrent. We needed more of that. Again, just for a show, to show people that we're not going to stand for this. You're not going to destroy our city. You're not going to hurt people. Our emergency service units could have been used more tactically than they were. Bicycles, I do not like the use of bicycles in that type of situation. People will get hurt. Police officers will get hurt. We have to go back to the way we used to in the 90s under Mayor Giuliani, because it worked. It kept people safe, and it ended these disturbances, these demonstrations before people got hurt.
There's been a lot of movement since the 90s to try to make sure that the NYPD practices policing in a more racially just and fair way. Do you agree that a lot of progress needed to be made on those fronts, and that at times in the 90s policing was too heavy-handed in any way?
I don't believe it was too heavy-handed, but I certainly believe that we had issues with race. And I think the Crown Heights riot showed that. We had two races, two religions, two totally different people living within the same community that were at each other's throats. And it just escalated the violence. It was a ticking time bomb. We needed more communication between the police and these two communities. We needed more communication between the communities themselves. We needed a mayor to be more involved into getting these communities together. We allowed that to go by, and we saw the results of it in 1991. So yes, there needed to be more conversation. There needed to be more communication. I certainly believe the police department has moved in that direction. I think they've done a very good job of doing such. When you have instances like last summer, though, when you have criminals and anarchists come into the city, well, that changes things.
Mr. Pepitone, you're the Conservative Party nominee here for mayor. Obviously, if voter registration is any indication, polling is any indication, there's a lot more people who identify as Democrats in New York City than Republicans or conservatives. How do you pitch across the aisle that people who you would need to vote for you to be successful in this race should vote for you, someone who is the Conservative Party nominee running on your platform? And I want to hear some other planks of it. But what are the ways in that platform and in what you're promising to do for the city beyond the public safety that we've discussed so far, that you try to reach across the aisle and convince some moderate to conservative Democrats, some independents, as well as obviously Republicans and conservatives to vote for you?
Common sense. It comes down to common sense. Our campaign has been about common sense since day one. People want public safety, of course. They want education for their children. We have to revamp our entire education system. I can do that. I will do that. Homelessness, it's right in front of our face. Every day we're seeing people on our streets being treated inhumanely in shelters. We have to address that. Common sense. Everybody wants to be treated humanely. Uh, our economy is tanking right before our eyes. We saw over 3,000 small businesses close down over the past year due to the pandemic and the mandates. It's right in front of our eyes. It's common sense. The city cannot survive if our businesses are closing and our economy is tanking. So that's not a Republican ideal. It's not a Democratic ideal. It's not conservative or liberal. It's common sense. And we're asking Democrats, Republicans, everyone to put their party affiliation on the side and vote for what's best for New York City.
So tell people a little bit more then about, let's say, a couple of the issues you mentioned, which are education and the economy. What would you do as mayor to improve the school system? What would you do as mayor to help revive and improve the city economy?
Well, regarding education, we have to revamp it. We have to revamp the way it's going right now with the critical race theory being so important and these radical social agendas that are being fed to our children. We have to go back to basics. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, just the basics, and real academics. We need a chancellor in place who believes in academics, who believes in testing for specialized high schools. We have to keep that in place. Give our children goals to shoot for. Give them lofty goals to shoot for. Our gifted and talented programs, this mayor wanted to do away with it. I will put them back in place and expand upon them to give our children more opportunities. Our special needs programs here in the city are an abomination. They have been out of compliance for 13 years. Not only is that unconscionable, it is illegal. Special needs programs will be the gold standard for this country under my leadership because it's so important to me and it's so important to our generation of children. So again, it's just going back to basics and doing what worked for many, many years before we went off the rails and started worrying more about social agendas than real academics. As far as our economy, we have to open up our city. Our city has been closed either fully or partially for a year and a half right now. And as I said, we've lost thousands of businesses. People have lost their livelihoods. Everywhere you go, you see businesses that are open now operating at maybe 60% because of the mandates. They will not survive over the long haul. They simply will not survive. We have to open them up. We can do it safely. There is a path to doing it safely. But we have to open our economy. We have to be business friendly. We have to loosen regulations. We have to make New York City a place where people want to come to own a business and to invest in.
Very briefly, it seems that one of the issues with a lack of capacity at some of these establishments is that office workers have not returned en masse to the city, especially the major office hubs of Midtown and downtown Manhattan, but also all over the city, remote work, et cetera. Would you try to do anything to encourage businesses to bring their employees back?
Absolutely. It's time. It's long past time for people to get back to work here in New York City. And I would talk to private entities. I would talk to companies and encourage them to implore their employees to get back to work. That's the only way we get our city moving. But a lot of things tie into that. We have to keep our subways safe so people can commute. We have to keep transportation safe. We have to keep our streets safe so people want to come back to New York City and want to come back to work. Yes, it's easy to sit in your living room and do it remotely, but to get the city back on track, people need to be back at work.
All right, we've given voters a taste of your candidacy. Bill Pepitone is a Conservative Party nominee for mayor of New York City. Thanks very much for the time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.